Well, welcome everyone to our weekly Wednesday webinar series. If you want to see greener, better homes for all and don't want to keep registering for our courses and want to get discounts on green building education certification and just to support our mission, head over to greenhomeinstitute.org to become a member. And I want you, after this webinar, I want you all to head over to www.chicagobuild.com, sign up for this free event in September. Book your plans to stay in Chicago. We'll be there. We'll be talking to some great folks, and we have a session on 10 tested tips at 3 o'clock on the 19th to getting to net zero affordably and easily. So we're going to see you all there. So go sign up and get your tickets booked to Chicago. Thanks to our session sponsor, introducing the all-new Rheem Prestige, an energy-efficient, quiet, all-electric hybrid heat pump water heater. The future of water heating is here. We're seeing on especially multifamily large projects per unit anywhere from $100 to $800 savings per year with these units with a short return on investment. And if you know anything about multifamily, it typically has higher cooling loads and heating loads. So these systems will take the heat out of the air and help with that situation as well. They also work for single family. I have one as well. Works great, very efficient. So check that out. And thanks to our top tier sponsor, Mitsubishi, very excited, Green Builder Media this year gave them the award for zoning efficiency, the Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US MLZ one-way ceiling cassette. So you can check that out along with all the other great winners in the January, February magazine. But Mitsubishi provides all your heating, cooling, and filtration needs all in one. Today's low-load homes require right-sized equipment that most systems, especially gas-fired, cannot meet. Mitsubishi has low-load, high-efficient heat pumps that dehumidify and cool in the summer and work in reverse to heat in the winter. Ductless mini splits can now be hidden in many different ways to meet your clients' needs, and ducted systems can now be used as well. Ducted systems are hidden behind the walls to ensure a beautiful space and can be retrofitted in place of a furnace of an existing single or multifamily project. Up here where I'm at, where it gets real cold, Hyperheat ensures an efficient heat delivery down to -13, and backup strip heaters kick in on those very rare but coldest of cold days. Each room of a house can be customized comfort while still being all electric and energy efficient for clients with different needs, and you only heat or cool the rooms that need it. Multifamily and commercial centralized variable refrigerant flow, or VRF systems, work great on larger projects looking to serve whole buildings. The neat thing is VRF heat recovery technology permits for simultaneous heating on the right, cooling on your left, as illustration depicts, and the space can be designed for many purposes, each area requiring a different cooling or heating need. Check out Mitsubishi Comfort today for all your HVAC needs. All right, well, welcome to Project Open, How to Build Carbon Neutral Buildings for Less Than Traditional Structures. This course is approved for 1 hour in continuing education units, GBCI, NARI Green, BPI, NonWholeHouse, AIBD, as well as AIA, Health, Welfare, and Safety, which may make it applicable to your state-based design or contractor license. Today, I will be your moderator. My name is Brett Little, and I am the executive director here at the nonprofit, the GreenHome Institute. So today we're going to be talking about taking these larger buildings in an affordable, effective way to carbon neutrality and all electric. And joining us is some great folks who have done this. Chris Parker is our presenter and has an abiding passion for helping places renew. The interest has gradually progressed from buildings to blocks to catalytic neighborhood redevelopments like the Imagine Jefferson and startup crossing efforts. As director of Give Group, he's overseen the successful completion of over 500 units of low and mixed use housing and has another 500 construction TOD locations across Utah. So with that, I will hand it over to our presenter, Chris, and please take it away.
Thanks, Brett, and thanks for the introduction. So my name is Chris Parker. As was said, I'm the executive director of Give Group. Give is a hybrid nonprofit for-profit community revitalization group based out of Salt Lake City. Basically, we go into blighted and transitional neighborhoods or areas that are about to gentrify and try to bring a little balance to them in either direction. we got interested in this topic via some studies that we did a couple years back on how air quality affects low and moderate income residents, which is probably surprising to nobody, is disproportionately high relative to people that can afford cars with filters in them that protect them from bad air. Basically speaking, if you're walking your kid to school and it's a red air day, that's going to matter a lot more to you than if you're driving your kid to school and dropping them off. So we started thinking about air quality in a kind of a meaningful way 2-3 years ago. And there's a reason for that. So Salt Lake City is, so we're based out of Salt Lake City, which is a pretty picturesque place in the U.S. It's benefited by being surrounded 360 degrees by mountains. Really idyllic place. Within 5 minutes, you can be kind of out of the city and into no man's land. You're 8 minutes to the airport. Generally speaking, it's a nice little oasis if you like living outdoors. It does have a different side, however, that's unusual for it. Because of those 360 degrees of mountains, it actually creates a bowl which traps every winter a fair amount of inversion in our Fair Valley. And so in January or February, there is likely to be a few days or a week or something to that effect where Salt Lake City, despite its relatively low population, has some of the worst air quality, if not the worst air quality in the U.S. It's also usually the fastest growing state in the union. We have a really high birth rate and we have a really high immigration rate. So we are projected to double as a population within the next 30 years. And basically speaking, if we continue to build things the way that we do and transport the way that we do, a doubling of inversion is going to make a very nice place to live, something that simply is not going to be inhabitable for 2 or 3 months out of the year. So that's why you might, it would be interested to see kind of a clean air push coming out of a very red state like Utah. But we have a very unique relationship with air quality that kind of drives what we do. So the question that we asked is, okay, well, in 10 years, if every building is no longer emitting anything into our air shed, what are the sorts of things that we need to do now in order to make that the new reality? So we started doing a fair amount of surveys around kind of the larger developers in our area and just asking them, why do we build the way that we do? And more importantly, why don't we build in a way that's, fully electric, fully offset, something that even though we can see our air, we're not adding to it. So we came up with 3 principal barriers that were stopping the Utah market, and more specifically the Wasatch Front market, of which Salt Lake City is kind of the head, from kind of going to net zero construction. The first one was for buildings of the size that we build. There's usually a density constraint associated with building net zero. Simply speaking, if you're going to do on-site energy production, the area of your rooftop is going to have to equate something with the volume underneath it. Those panels are going to be your limiting factor on how big your building can be. And in our market, which does have a fair amount of sun, that basically means your building's going to be 2 or 3 stories if you're trying to generate all the power that you need on site for that structure. So if you go to Mr. or Mrs. Developer and say, hey, you need to do the right thing, it's only going to cost you 40, 50% of your units, it's a fairly short conversation. And it's not even clear that it's the right thing to do. So if you're a developer like us who typically builds mixed income developments, do you build less affordable housing in order to build a fully green building, or do you get more units for people that don't have any place else to live that's affordable? It's not a clean answer. So an ideal scenario would be one that doesn't require you to change your building envelope, doesn't require you to change your building size, doesn't require you to change anything that you want to build with your building if you're a developer. All we're trying to do is change the actual mechanical systems you put in. So that would be the ideal solution relative to what we were seeing in the market at large. Well, the second biggest barrier that I'm sure everyone's familiar with is there's a perception that building all electric or building net zero, building carbon offset or whatever you want to do costs a lot more money. And a lot of that's driven by the first problem, right? So if you're really micromanaging every little kilowatt because you've got a solar field on your roof and it's got a power underneath, then you start getting into things like VRF systems, foot thick walls, triple pane windows, things that are great to do, but again, makes the pitch somewhat convoluted if you're talking to people whose principal concern isn't, reducing their emissions in the world. So a VRF system on the building we're about to see, which is 112 units, would have been an extra $1 million to put in that structure relative to what normal kind of construction in our market is. Again, if the goal is for everyone to do this, a conversation that starts with it's only going to cost you an extra $1 million is pretty much a non-starter. And so Utah simply hasn't built many net zero buildings. We've built some, and they're pretty cool. But as a proportion, they're probably less than 2% of our general building kind of ecosystem here over the last 10 years. That's changed quite a bit this year, but we'll talk about that in a minute. And the third principal barrier to kind of everyone in our market moving to net zero is just inertia. These are very long-term investments. If you've got a builder who's used to doing something, he knows it works, you're going to have a pretty strong case in order to push them off that, because otherwise they're getting the call back in 2 or 3 years or even in 15 years when something doesn't work. And the going fully net zero and kind of cutting that gas pipe is not something that's easily reversible if you find out that you've made a mistake. So you're going to have some really heavy reason for people to move away from it, and you're also going to have to make it something that is proven, so people can look and touch and feel and say, yeah, this is actually working. So given that, rather than kind of have our initial focus on how do we go ahead and make the most efficient building in the world, or how do we go ahead and make this very purely net zero or net positive or even fully off grid, our interest was how do we get the guy who's rolling coal out the top of his diesel truck to build his next building net zero. If we can move a path where that person is going to go ahead and build an all-electric building, then we kind of won the market. We need to kind of align those two forces where our goal isn't to have the purest building. Our goal is to have something that has zero emissions, that has a market incentive strong enough to make people flip over to it, even if their real interest isn't, attending seminars like this. So that was kind of the goal that we set down with for a while. And this is Project Open. It's a fairly normal building from the outside, as you'll see from this rendering. It's, like I said, 112 units. About 80 of those are affordable. The rest are market rate, almost primarily one bedroom building units. We have 1 2-bedroom. It was just kind of an accident of design on the front. And it's basically a research project. So all the data from this building in perpetuity will be online and available starting in about 2 months. The real energy usage of it. It's also got a host of different things it's trying out from quality of life metrics. So there's transportation systems that are all electric that are built into the building. There's food access kind of metrics that are built into the building, statistics, and a lot of things that aren't particularly germane to today's discussion. But we'll go ahead and put together a link for you guys, maybe at the end of this to send out, where you can kind of check on the real-time performance of this building, not only as a structure, but also as how it's relating to the residents' lives. And what it is, like I was saying, is fairly normal in most regards. Our goal was to build kind of as typical a building as we could, because our proof of concept wanted to be that a normal building, a normal development company, a normal architect, a normal contractor could go ahead and move over to this. So, here's some general stats on the building. That $17 million total budget also includes $1 million rework of a historic, furniture warehouse, actually. So $16 million really for the structure that you saw in the rendering, which is pretty normal, at least for the time. It's a little cheaper as a building than what you would see in the market, but not dramatically so. The principal difference, however, is that it's all electric, it's fully offset, and that offset is done in a little bit different way than you might normally see in a carbon neutral building. So when we went ahead and mocked up our building and did the electrical systems in it that would come in at the price point that we could prove was less expensive than traditional structures, we ended up needing about 3.5 acres of solar field to power our 1.5-acre site. And so one of the more unique things about this building is we partnered with our utility through a program that they're calling Subscriber Solar to go ahead and basically condo out 3.5 acres of solar field in southern Utah that come online at the same time as our building. So the at least half the secret sauce is that partnership. Subscriber solar works a little different than the typical offset. Many of those are good things to do, but it's really, you pollute a lot, pay someone some money, you pretend like you didn't pollute. What's nice about this field is you literally could sign your name on your panels. So it is the equivalent of just taking them off your roof and putting them somewhere down south. The other interesting thing is we were able to have the utility pay for the entirety of the upfront cost of these panels. So we pay a utility bill similar to whatever other bill we would have paid. That goes to them, and they do the upfront cost. They basically amortize their costs over 20 years. The program is interesting in that we're able to back out of it at any time, and then they will, move those panels to somebody else's kind of account. But they are locked for 20 years and cannot raise rates on us. So you have a lot of the benefits of kind of having a PV array on your roof, and that you kind of have fixed production, you have kind of fixed needs for power, but because the upfront cost of this were borne by the utility and not us, that kind of major disincentive to cost is kind of offloaded. So our building is 100% offset, and it's done kind of down here in southern Utah. There's a couple benefits to that. If you're looking at an overall kind of ecosystem to do fully offset, do well. Solar panel in a grid in southern Utah in a kind of a massive expanse like this is about $1 a watt to install, relative to $2.50 or even up to $3.50 a watt on your roof. The solar exposure in southern Utah is substantially better than in the Salt Lake market. So pound for pound, you can get more panels, and you can get those panels cooking out kind of better efficiency down in southern Utah than in your roof. You're also not penetrating your roof. There's a host of things, putting solar on your roof that aren't necessarily ideal. So this at least opened the door for us to go ahead and prove out a model where, with a straight face, we could go to a developer and show them this. We went ahead and had our contractor do a side-by-side analysis of whether or not they would build this building in the way that it's typically built in at least the Salt Lake City market versus how we ended up building. And we were pleased, after having our engineers go the rounds a bit on what could be done, that we came in apples to apples cheaper than had we done it the way that other people are doing it in our market. So one of the benefits of net zero building, or a carbon neutral building, that I'm sure no one is surprised by, is that you don't have to do things like combustion shafting. You don't have to penetrate your envelope for those shafts. There's a lot of things we do in buildings that aren't ideal, that are basically protecting us from the toxic gas we're putting in our building that we're then lighting on fire, that we're then trying to protect ourselves from. So by really kind of addressing what the real cost of each one of those things was, our first phase came out a little cheaper. And this is before rebate. We saved about $63,000 relative to a conventional building. The kind of proof in the pudding on the energy usage side also was heartening. So one of the main knocks off systems that aren't, say, a VRS system is that heating. Salt Lake City does get cold. Is kind of a concern for a lot of people. What's nice about moving to a net zero building is if you look at our residents' kind of overall utility cost profile, we found that the usage of our residents was about $3 more a month on average, up to $4 more a month on average than it would be were we in a conventional structure. However, you are not connected to a utility that charges you a mandatory minimum fee by not connecting to natural gas. So when we looked at the overall profile of what our residents were actually spending for energy, because they were only connected to one rather than two utilities, and you save that in our market about $7 a month connection, you actually do have a net savings to the resident, and you've done that in a way that hasn't cost you any more to build on the upfront, which the development community is apt to be more interested in. A substantial portion of all buildings, especially multifamily buildings, are sold within the first year. And so a lot of those developers are not particularly convinced by a 10-year payoff or a 20-year payoff, because at the end of the day, they don't get to put that in their pro forma when they go ahead and sell it off, or at least it's more difficult for them to do. So by finding a way where you're not damaging the residence utility bills, those are more or less the same, and you have upfront savings, now you have a market incentive for kind of an overall development market to move in the direction that we would like them to, that really has nothing to do with anyone particularly caring about air quality or global warming or whatever you might care about. So that building was completed in 2017. It's been operating since, and it has led to a couple other versions. This was our first attempt at this. The gear in here basically is an electric tankless hot water heater that do great. The heating system is a fan coil hooked to the heat pump. We also have a backup resistance heat. We were a little nervous in our market about whether this would work, so we didn't want to be caught with people not having heat in their units if for some reason a deep cycle mini split or something didn't work out. So it was kind of V1, and it worked. The savings are real, and I've lived in this building for a year, and it was very comfortable to be in. It let us have the design itself was allowed to be a little bit better, honestly, in relation to kind of quality of life metrics. So if I'm not really concerned about micromanaging my energy usage, all of a sudden I can put in things like giant picture windows that I would be skeptical to do otherwise. I'm allowed to build in a very normal way. So none of our construction costs went up apart from the mechanical systems and the electrical systems changing, which gives us a pitch. So we went ahead and from this building moved into a V2, if you will. So this is a project that's currently under construction in downtown Salt Lake. It's one of two buildings, very large structure. It's 400 plus units. It's got about 16,000 feet of retail, has a 30,000 foot co-working space built into it. Very diverse use. The difference between the version 1 systems and the version 2 systems, between this and that building we'll look at in a second. This building is right next door to Open One. It's our second phase as well, also under construction. And between the two of them, we did a little better. So here's the side-by-side comparison of what systems are being used in those buildings. This one's just using Open 2, which is the smaller of the two. So this is a 95 unit building. And even though it's about 20 units less than Open One, the savings are substantially more. A lot of that came from the balance of electrical increase on Open One going down a bit. And then we did move to a ductless mini split on these units. The water heating is kind of split. We have some large units, some 3 and 4 bedroom units. Those are using a hybrid tank water heater. And then the smaller ones are still using that pack kind of tankless water heater. But this number is enough to be motivating. If you can go to Mr. and Mrs. Developer and say, hey, I'm going to save you $250,000 on your next building, it almost doesn't matter what you say at the end of it, so long as it's really not going to be injurious to their residents. And we found some success, which we'll talk about a little bit toward the end of this presentation. But yeah, so this is kind of version 2. Version 3 is also under construction, a little bit behind the other ones, but currently under construction. This is actually a permanent supportive housing building that we're hoping the Housing Authority of Salt Lake City build. One of our shelters is getting closed down. You're going to have a lot of displaced people in the homeless community. This will have 100 units of housing to support them. This is different and has a substantially higher savings. The principal difference in this building is we went ahead and zoned the water heating. So from an electrical use perspective, going all the way back to Open one of the main drivers of our electrical increase was actually the water heaters. You would have 240 or 250 amp pulls to every single water heater in every single unit. And that's almost as much as the rest of the unit combined. And so by moving to a zoned system, which we'll see a little bit of a backdrop here in a minute of, we were able to save that connection to each unit. So this building basically has hybrid tanked water heaters. Per floor, you'll have 4 or 5 of them, and that kind of runs in a loop through the entire floor. We go ahead and put a sub-meter on each unit. for hot water specifically. So rather than charging people energy, we're charging them, we know how many gallons of hot water they use, and you go ahead and figure out what it costs you to heat a gallon of hot water, and that's what they get charged. But that makes it so instead of, if your floor is 20 units like this building, or 25 units like this building is, instead of 25 units needing two 40 or 50 amp pulls out of the water heater, you've got 4 or 5 water heaters that, because they're, heat pump water heaters, only need something like a 30 or a 40 amp pull to do. So your load for electrical goes down dramatically. And that's really the principal difference between the pricing that you saw on Open One and this one. And again, that's starting to be a very real number. $350,000 changes the discussion, or at least has changed the discussion with people.
Hey, Chris, I just wanted to jump in here with a question real quick, if you can hear me.
Sure thing.
Yeah, so you're stating that there's a difference in the water heaters between this one and the last one, but I gotta say, if you want to go back to that last one, I feel like I'm just reading the exact same thing here. So could you help me out?
That's actually an error on that slide. I apologize. That got carried over. The Steeble ones are the tankless ones that we're talking about. So I apologize for not updating that slide. But regardless of what the slide actually might say, we use your sponsor, I believe, on this. We use 80-gallon reams on this. I believe we have 4 per floor with a storage tank in kind of a room. They're vented into different areas, so you're not having the same room. Those water heaters fight against each other, so they're vented to the outside. There's a louver that allows us to go ahead and during the summer months, when you actually want that cool air coming off of those systems, to pipe it into the hallway. Yeah, my apologies. That slide is inaccurate as to the Steeble one. Those are actually converted to a ream 80-gallon on that particular project. So thank you for that catch.
Yeah, no problem. And just 2 more questions on that. I wanted to be clear. Are you using those 80 gallons to service more than 1 unit? I wasn't sure if I heard that correctly. And then the other benefit that you stated, and I was hoping you could reiterate, was the downsizing of the electrical load.
Correct. So we basically have a hot water room per floor. We had considered doing a central boiler for the entire building, but when we kind of ran the efficiencies, it was better to go ahead and have 4 or 5 hot water tanks per floor. So you'll have those heat pumps, basically acting as thermal batteries, and then you have a loop that goes to all of the units that just continuously is circulating. The savings, the initial savings that you might expect is that you're moving from 25 hot water heaters to 4 or 5. In reality, that savings largely gets made up by the fact that you've now got to run pipe and you've got to run some circulation equipment. But the electrical savings, by only having some very efficient, hot water tanks that need, a 30 or a 40 amp pull at most, relative to almost 50 pulls of that size, really is where that electrical load came down to where it's more or less even with conventional, which was surprising to us, but is really where a lot of these savings are born from.
And another follow-up question is, we've heard complaints before on these heat pump water heaters, mostly in super cold climate zone 6 single-family homes, where they're located kind of like in the living room or near a sleeping area, of people just being, really cold, of it sucking all the heat out. So have you talked to or surveyed any of the residents who are sort of adjacent to the rooms these are located in to see if they've had any issues?
So this is a building that's under construction currently. We've engineered it to have fresh air intake for the heat pump rather than being kind of enclosed in a room. So the air that's both coming out of that hot water heater and coming into that hot water heater coming from the outside. My suspicion is that would solve any sort of adjacency cooling problems that someone might heat if they just put one of these in their house, and then it was cooling them down substantially.
Oh, thank you.
Yep. So yeah, that building is currently under construction. I thought I'd throw in kind of our current maybe V4 system that goes a little further than that too. So this building randomly will be called Diamond Rail because of where it was built. Long story, won't bore you with it. But we were looking at a way to, now that we're starting to see some really substantial savings, can we go ahead and take back a little bit of that savings and start getting, a building that's, doing even more about where it's sourcing its energy. So this building's 80 units, about 20 of those are 3 beds, the rest are studios. You've got some retail on the bottom floor. And basically the model that we're using now is kind of what we would suggest to other people trying to either pitch this in their market or build this in their market, is we looked at that hot water load again, which when I was living in Open 1, the first project we did, my cost to heat water was actually in excess of my cost to heat my unit, surprisingly enough. I wasn't expecting that. So what we're going to do on this building is have on-site solar, which, it's a very efficient building. This is a 6-story structure, so you don't have a whole lot of solar exposure on this. But we'll use what we can. We'll connect that to a battery that we can go ahead, that both we can turn on and off, and then ideally the utility itself can turn on and off in a very short time frame. Those will be hooked to this zoned water heating that we were talking about. We're using some different water heaters on this particular project. There's some new 120-gallon products that we'll like to use rather than the 80-gallon reams. But that battery is going to go ahead and kick those on at a time that makes sense. But you're basically going to suck all the solar power you get off on a day into the battery. In our particular market, there's actually about an hour and a half, 2 hours that we found out the grid itself has too much renewable energy. So we're adjacent to Wyoming. It has massive amounts of wind power coming out of that state. And so you're throwing away renewable energy more or less in the middle of the night when nobody is using it. So by having the battery being able to kick on from their point of view and being able to kick on from our point of view, the idea would be that our entire hot water loop, all of the water heaters would be born off of a large battery. You would only have that battery receive direct electricity from our panels and then receive it at a time and day that we know there's excess renewable on the grid. So we're helping the utility with their problem in building renewables. And that powers all your water heating. So theoretically, you're probably better than net zero in this system, because you're not just overproducing and then taking off the grid and not looking at where that grid takeoff is. You're producing and then you're only taking off the grid at times when they have too much renewable energy, and that handles your entire hot water system. Very efficient to run. If you're a affordable housing developer, the amount of rent you can charge is directly related to the utilities your residents go ahead and pay. So if you're an economically motivated developer, that's really big for you. If you're not an economically motivated developer, or at least not solely an economically related developer, kind of like us, it's nice to know that really that entire hot water loop is basically coming from clean sources. And then again, because the building overall needs a lot more power than those two things combined could use, or at least we're not currently conceiving of a battery big enough to run the entire kind of heating and cooling of the building. We'll still have the subscriber solar partnership with Rocky Mountain for the meter that kind of goes to the units themselves. So this will be a master metered building. So between the two of them, you've got full offset on 60% of your load, and then you have kind of a true pure renewable, so to speak, that's somewhere above net zero, something close to off grid, but using the grid for all of your water heating. This saving, that battery isn't that much money. So if you're going to pitch another developer, you're basically showing them, hey, I'm going to save you $200,000, and maybe you don't talk about the 350, or be honest with them on the 350. Our nonprofit basically is hiring a few people whose sole job it is to help various developers do this. And what we wanted to do is give them a step one, where, hey, if you want to save, if money is the primary issue, here's how you go ahead and do a pure electric building. If you want to be, a little more um, dialed in on your energy kind of suck, then here's something that still saves you a lot of money over what you're about to do that also is a little bit cleaner on the grid. Um, but our but either one of those are fine for us. And part of that is, as I'm sure won't be surprising to anyone here, kind of where electricity is coming from these days. So some of you may have seen this graph before. Basically, in 2014, coal died. We're no longer building those plants. If you look at the last couple of years, and I need to update this with a newer slide that has all of 2018 in it, but you're seeing renewable being half of the grid production, basically, in new production brought online to handle new demand, and then the rest of it's in natural gas. So if all you do is electrify, in at least the Wasatch Front kind of Utah market, you're kind of done. The emissions that are really causing childhood asthma and whatnot in our kind of soup bowl, so to speak, go away if you electrify. And you get half off, more to speak. If you build 10,000 units and you build some power generation to handle those, it's probably going to be either natural gas or renewable right now, about 50-50. So our kind of push has moved to electrify first and let the grid kind of handle itself in the back end, because the economics will push it toward being cleaner and cleaner. But if kind of our pitch to people is, hey, you need to be net zero or you need to be carbon neutral, and that's the primary pitch, then we might lose them on something ancillary to the real thing, which is we got to stop putting gas pipes to our buildings, because that's a 50-year decision before I'm going to get to talk to them again. And the grid itself is cleaning kind of day by day. Even if it's not cleaning, let's say that you're a pure natural gas community, or you just want to kind of devil's advocate it, it's actually not clear that it's not better to use natural gas via an electric system anyway. So this is an adaptation of a graph by Electric Power Research Institute. But if you have kind of two directions where your natural gas can go, you throw it through a pipe, as most people do, and you fire it up in a gas furnace. We'll call it 90% efficient. That's kind of the average. Even if it was 95 or 96 in a really efficient kind of zone, you're using X amount of BTUs on that. So on this particular graph would be 38 BTUs. If you pump that through a power plant, and then even you lose some off the grid because heat pump systems are so efficient, you're using less natural gas, even if you go all electric, than you would if you were pumping that gas directly to your building. So again, from kind of our want, the electrification being the battle cry is kind of our number one interest. And then for people that want to take that extra step, we want to show them how to do that. That's not going to cost them anything, but we see ourselves as kind of an electrification advocate at this point, more so than necessarily a net zero advocate. And that's important everywhere, but very important in our market. This is a good day in Salt Lake. It's a great place to live, but unless we figure out how to kind of change how we're building, this is not going to be a great place to live for very long. Here's just a couple graphs on stuff I already talked about on utility scale pricing for solar relative to putting it on your rooftop itself. Just for reference, if anyone wants to see them, this is kind of another slide on what transportation does using the same kind of fuel sources. But apart from that, I'm happy to answer any questions on how this building was, how it's been, how advocacy has been in our general market. I'm happy to report that because of a lot of efforts, not the least of which is the building in front of you, there's actually more all-electric, highly efficient buildings being constructed in the Utah market this year than the last 10 years combined. By aligning the economic incentive with the air quality incentive, we've really started seeing a substantial portion of projects that are currently under development start telling their engineers they want to go all electric. So we've been really heartened by that. And I think just, again, aligning that economic incentive with the air quality incentive, at least from our position, really has been a successful line of attack and might be the way that we go ahead and change a market rather than fighting against a market or demonizing a utility. So thanks. Anyone have any questions?
Yeah, we definitely got some questions in. Before we get to those, just real quick, for those of you who want to get your CEUs, make sure to take that survey that pops up right when we get done, or it'll be emailed to you as well. So just take it once. And even if you don't need CEUs, we appreciate your feedback. For those of you watching this in the future, on the recording, make sure to take that quiz with an 80% passing rate and follow all the instructions to get your CEUs. If you're on our YouTube channel, go down below the video and click the YouTube link button, and then on the left there you'll see click show more within the comments details section, and then on the right there you'll see a link to access the quiz and then submit the quiz. And we got some questions pouring in. We got a lot of time for those, but right before we get to those, big thanks to all of our sponsors, our board of directors, our members, everyone who allows us to do what we do. And a huge thanks to our top tier sponsors, T-Stud, structurally insulated framing systems that save money behind the walls, Panasonic ventilation for all your ventilation needs, from large projects to small projects to simple ventilations to more complex ventilation, and then Mitsubishi Electric to help you get to net zero carbon in an all electric fashion that saves energy and money. So yeah, so one of the questions that came in was just some of the terminology, and I know there can be different terms depending on where you're at and what utility you're in, but the question was, is there a name for the model where the utility can operate your distributed energy resources?
I'm not aware of one. There should be. I mean, in the Utah market, there was an interesting kind of tension between the utility and people who say wanted to put solar on their rooftop. Again, you've got very big economic players in markets that are utilities. We've really got to, if we're serious about taking the entirety of our kind of collective usage and moving it to renewables, you can't do that without working with the utility. So I would love to see some terminology that doesn't paint a grid tied but demand responsive model as something less than net zero. I would love it if someone came up with that word, because I don't see a future where net zero, candidly, on-site net zero gets us there, especially for large buildings. So we've got to find a word that is kind of on equal footing, where if someone is going the extra mile and really helping the grid build more renewable resources, that they've got a fancy title, but I'm not aware of one currently.
Following up on that, for DERs and the utilities being in control of them, I know out here with just your air conditioning, they can control that thing and throttle it back. And to some degree, there's just concern about large entities having control of your devices. I mean, what is your thoughts on that playing into this?
I mean, where it's the battery itself, we do have an unusually good, I think, relationship now with our utility. We kind of wanted to do this, and we were surprised by how receptive they were. So I understand that. With large buildings, you can either guess at when you want to pull grid. So, for instance, for Wyoming wind, usually between midnight and about 1:30 is when we have too much power. But they're the only ones that really know on a day-to-day basis and within like a 20-second load up, load down basis on where they're pulling energy from. So I think it depends on kind of how wonky you want to get. If you just want to estimate and say, look, my estimate will generally suck power off the grid when they've got too much, then I don't think you have to give them that control. The utility itself probably is more inclined to help you buy that battery if they do have control, and they're probably more able to really make sure none of your kilowatts were taking off the grid when they didn't have excess energy. But I appreciate the concern. For us, the benefits outweighed the costs on going ahead and allowing them to have control of that as well.
So, obviously some of the pushback we get for electrification is grid loss, and this argument that a ton of the energy is just lost in transmission. So, how do you deal with that? And then this, comment, this was more of a comment out there, but it was just saying, the reality is methane leakage probably isn't fully accounted for. So do you, utilize that as a way to speak to the grid loss?
Well, for us, I mean, air quality is, a collaborative thing by nature, right? If you have a net zero building, you don't get a magic bubble of clean air around your building. Everybody's got to kind of do it. And once you start looking at the overall ecosystem rather than just your building itself, say you have grid loss of say 7%, even up to 10%. If the cost of installing solar is 1/3 in a large grid tied kind of utility structure of what it costs to put you on your roof, then a 7% grid loss is still far less than the efficiency gain you get by building 2 or 3 panels to every cost of one you have on your roof. Now, different people are buying that panel. I completely understand. But if we're looking at, we've got a theoretical $10 million that we want to put into solar production, it's going to be way ahead to go ahead and have a big field put in a place that has a lot of energy exposure or solar exposure than it is to necessarily worry about the 7% gain, or at least that's how we were thinking about it. Definitely grid loss, but that grid loss relative to the increase in production of having it far more efficiently built is dwarfed, at least in our opinion.
Um, so another question is getting into the actual structure. We kind of see that at bare minimum, from air sealing and insulation standpoint, there's your code, whatever it may be. And then of course there's sort of the idealistic passive house level, right, of air sealing and insulation. So, the question is, where do you all fall sort of in that spectrum? And then how did that differ between the two buildings?
So there's a certification that Enterprise does called Green Communities that is like a LEED but doesn't cost anything. So a lot of affordable buildings that are want to be good stewards of public funds use this certification, especially in Utah. It's more or less required. So we do have fairly tight shells. We're caulking all of our joints and even to the extent of caulking our outlets. We use efficient windows, where the test for us is where does it start costing a lot more money? Because again, our kind of missive isn't necessarily to make the perfect house, although maybe my personal home would want to do that. It's what can the market readily adopt, because that's kind of our target, is what's an easy thing that everybody can do that is going to get us more or less to our goals, rather than what's the best thing to do. So our properties and multifamily in generally is really quite hard to do passive house in. You basically have one wall of window unless you're on a corner, and so that window wants to be big, and you want to get a lot of light in, otherwise you're going to have a very depressed person inside. So I would say this building for what it might be would be maybe a LEED goldish level, but all of those points were done in ways, again, that economically weren't disadvantageous, because what we're trying to prove with our structures isn't the best structure theoretically possible. It's the best structure that everybody can do right now relative to what they're doing that isn't going to cost them any money, which feels a little dirty in the beginning, but we feel like that's the argument we're going to have to win to get everybody to do this. So that's kind of our focus.
What was the additional cost on the solar panels? Because I remember, if I recall, it was the third building you're actually going to be putting physical solar on, correct?
Fourth building, we've got about 120 grand of solar, and that'll be put on that building. It's probably less than that, but I'm also including all the gear to kind of switch it up, and then a portion of that battery.
Talking about air quality, and obviously it seems your approach to helping protect people from the issues of air quality is reducing the emissions that cause it in the first place. But given that could take a while to sort of roll out, as you mentioned, your building's not in a bubble. What else are you doing in your property to make sure that people have pristine indoor air quality?
We have a fair amount of mechanical ventilation we put in every unit. again, Utah's a really interesting market where during the middle of the day in January, your indoor air is a lot cleaner than your outdoor air. So we put those on, we have systems that are based on timers but are also controllable by the tenant that goes ahead and recirculates that air. And there's a filtration system in our hallways. So we positively pressurize our hallways. So the hallways basically blow into the units rather than the opposite. And those systems have filtration built within them, which is kind of needed. Again, I don't mean to say that Salt Lake is like some hellscape of bad air, but there's a month or two where it gets a little dicey. So having systems that can kind of respond and give you several clean air changes per hour is kind of how we've addressed that. And then making sure that where those aid changes come from, rather than being the outside air coming kind of directly in or coming from kind of a hallway situation, that we're conditioning and then cleaning that air. It's how we're trying to address that.
If I understand the enterprise program, it has a lot of low or no VOC requirements for the products you put in, correct?
Correct. Yeah, we're no VOC. There's a lot. I mean, all the materiality in the unit are completely non-emitting as well. I mean, we actually went away from granite that has an ability to kind of off gas over time. Certain stuff as well. So it's we went ahead and did everything really that would get you to be a healthier structure that was within the generalized budget. So even if it cost us a little more here or there, we could save that somewhere else. It's a good building. I didn't mean to suggest it's a completely average building, but it is a building that costs the same as an average building. And that was important to us again, because we're trying to convince people who aren't terribly interested in the cause we're fighting for.
Maybe I missed it too, but I noticed you went from ducted air source heat pumps in the first one or two to ductless, or maybe they were ducted mini splits. I know some people do that too. But did you find that, I typically understand those systems cost a little bit more. So did you find the savings of not using the ducts as far as install and cost to help offset that cost?
No, that's exactly right. The PSH project we talked about even had hidden kind of mini splits. In the U.S. market, there's some reticence for multifamily developers to have that kind of pack on the wall. It's pretty normal in Europe, but it's perceived as ugly here. And then because of that tenant population, with people that are having kind of, a mental impairment in a given moment might see something that is pull-offable from a wall as threatening, and they want to kind of go through it or whatnot. So we went ahead and did a mini split that wasn't ducted, but was sunk into the ceiling, similar to some of the ones that you mentioned from your sponsors earlier in the program. And the savings on not having to duct anything far outweighs the slight increase in units. The units are fairly tight as well, and so the sizing of that mini split, even the smallest one, is in substantial excess of what we would need. And now you are starting to see that those technologies get down into the negative degrees. I think the ones we're using go down to negative, I want to say 11 or 12 before you have anything less than 100% efficiency. So yeah, the overall cost of system is cheaper with mini splits now, as long as you're in a studio or one bedroom. As soon as you move into a 2-bedroom and you have to have a couple heads, then it gets about even in our experience. And if you're doing a larger unit, the 3 bedrooms, for instance, and 4 bedrooms that we put into Open 2 still use that fan coil system we used in Open 1, because at that point the ducting made more sense than having a 4-headed mini split.
Great. And then the other question I had here was, where was it here? Transportation. So obviously, transportation is a huge cost, especially for affordable housing and low income population. So, do you have any strategies or any upcoming strategies that will either assist folks in being able to get to where they need to, either without a car, or fund it, and or being able to access and use electric cars to reduce emissions and costs, and be able to charge that at your residences.
No, we do. So Open One, you're right on. The second biggest expense for people of modest means is often transportation. And importantly, the size of the expense is one thing, but the irregularity of that expense is another thing. So if you're making, $15 an hour, $10 an hour, and you're driving around a $3,000 car, you've got $1,000 problem waiting to wake you up any morning when that transmission goes, that engine goes, or some other mechanical thing happens. And you start seeing that irregularity where someone doesn't have the savings with which they can kind of handle it, really leading to things like homelessness. Now, you've got to get to work. You got $1,000 car bill. You're going to pay that first. So you're going to go to a check cashing place and get into that spiral. You're going to be late on your rent. You're going to have a whole host of things. So if we can go ahead and lower the cost of transportation, but also make it more regular, then you would have a win from an economic standpoint. We also wanted the building to address more than just kind of emissions coming from the actual structure. So Open One has electric vehicles that it owns. That actually we just signed a partnership with a group out of San Francisco to do a software that will operate very much like a zip car. So all of the under building parking in Open is pre-wired for electric vehicles. And then we have electric cars that residents will be able to basically buy a package for. So you'll get a full transit pass, and you'll get X amount of hours on an electric vehicle for those sort of trips that aren't really natural to do on transit, for about the same cost as the transit pass would have cost you regularly. And again, the economics of that we think are really favorable, but as importantly, now you've taken almost the entirety of someone's life when you combine it to some of the food that we're kind of putting in the projects, and both neighboring and in that one, where that emission per person goes down pretty dramatically while helping them kind of balance the budget. I think I should note too that I think that model will get a lot easier as driverless technology comes online. So what we hope is that you can imagine in 5 years or 6 years or whatever it takes for driverless cars to kind of become legal in most of the states, you can have a fleet of electric vehicles. Tesla's already talked about you being able to have basically a family plan where you could have one vehicle that simply a bunch of people could call, summon, much like an Uber, that goes and drops people off at work and takes them to wherever they want, and they just call it back. And you have maybe a fleet for the vehicle of 5 or 6 cars, or for the building that's 5 or 6 cars. And now everybody can basically use a centralized package for their transportation that also happens to be running off the sun, given our sourcing. And I think that combination not only is a really nice amenity to have for residents, but it does take the overall emission profile of the people living in that building down very far.
Great. Well, I really appreciate you elaborating a little bit more on the transportation piece, and that brings us right to our time. And I don't see any other questions. So just maybe real quick, can you just let us know where people could contact you for more information? You had mentioned that there's going to be some open source data that people can access here coming up soon. So where could they find that? And then finally, it sounded like you help others do this, which I think, quite honestly, we really need all the help we can get. So I would maybe just finalize in saying, where can people contact you for that help? And are you only helping people in your local area on your grid, or is this assistance being given elsewhere throughout the U.S.?
No, I mean, I appreciate the opportunity to chat. Thanks for having me. The easiest way to reach me is just Chris, CHRIS, at givgroup.org. And to answer your question, that group will be Utah focused, but they'll answer questions from anybody. So especially maybe on how to go ahead and start some of this in your own market, or maybe talk to your utility about opening up something like Subscriber. We're really happy to help anybody in any place get this done.
Great. Well, Chris, thanks to you. Thanks to Give Group. Thanks to you all for joining us. Have a great rest of your week. Take care, all.